The walls did not just surround me, they inhaled. Every time I drew breath, the translucent amber of the chamber pulsed with a dull, rhythmic gold, mirroring the frantic cadence of my own lungs. I was a fly caught in a very expensive, very intelligent web. My head throbbed with the ghost of 1,000 needles, a lingering ache from the resonance crown they had stripped from my brow 3 days ago. Or perhaps it was 4. Time on Aethelgard did not move in seconds. It moved in the slow, agonizing drip of resin. I stood up, my boots making no sound on the floor that felt like sun-warmed flesh. I approached the viewport, which was less a window and more a thinning of the biological matter. Outside, the spires of the high citadel rose like frozen lightning, their crystalline surfaces refracting the light of the binary suns into a kaleidoscope of violet and copper. It was beautiful. It was a tomb. "You are awake," a voice resonated, not in the air, but directly against the base of my skull. The door, a sphincter-like opening in the amber wall, dilated with a wet, organic hiss. Sovereign Kaelith stepped through. She was a vision of lethal elegance, her skin shimmering like liquid mercury under the afternoon light. She wore robes of woven neural filaments that trailed behind her like the tail of a comet. Her eyes, pools of deep indigo flecked with stardust, were fixed on me with a gaze that could have flash-frozen a sun. "Listen, Sovereign," I began, my voice raspy. "I didn't mean to trip your wires. I was just trying to stop that blast." The air in the room grew heavy, the atmospheric pressure increasing as her temper flared. The amber walls turned a bruised, angry crimson. "You did more than trip wires, Silas Vane," she spat. The title human felt like a slur coming from her. "You have tethered your ghost to mine. You have violated a lineage that has remained pure for 10,000 years. I backed away until my spine pressed against the warm wall. The bond flared in response. A sudden surge of heat bloomed in my chest, a sensation of drowning in honey and lightning. It wasn't my emotion, it was hers. I could feel her fury, yes, but beneath it was a cold, sharp blade of terror. "What do the healers say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Kaelith approached until she was a mere foot away. She was taller than me, her presence a physical weight. Her nostrils flared and her ears, long and tipped with bioluminescent sensors, twitched with agitation. "They say the impossible has happened. The synthesis was triggered. My body has accepted your genetic sequence as its own." She reached out, her fingers hovering just inches from my stomach, then moving to her own. Her hand trembled. It was the first sign of weakness I had seen in her. "I carry a life, Silas, a thing of silver and bronze, a hybrid that defies every law of the Aethelgard." I swallowed hard. "I'm a biologist, Kaelith. I know the odds. Cross-species gestation shouldn't be possible without a laboratory and 1,000 gene splicers." "Nature doesn't need a laboratory when the pulse is involved," she whispered, and for a second the anger vanished, replaced by a hollow, haunting vulnerability. The sabotage at the ceremony, the energy surge, it used you as a conductor. It forced us into a union that should have taken decades of meditation to achieve. You impregnated me, human. You have stolen my future and replaced it with an anomaly. I reached out, a purely human instinct to offer comfort, but she recoiled as if I were made of acid. "Stay back," she commanded, and the walls groaned in sympathy. The bond between us snapped like a whip, a jolt of psychic pain that sent me to my knees. I gasped for air, clutching my chest. "You feel that too, don't you? The connection. You can't kill me, and you can't let me go." Kaelith looked down at me, her skin shifting to a stormy, somber blue. "You are right. I cannot let you leave. The traditionalists are already calling for your head. They think you are a parasite. If I let you out of this palace, they will tear you apart to see how your heart beats. And if you die, the shock to the bond might kill the child. Or me. So I'm a prisoner?" She turned her back to me, her silhouette framed by the glowing city. "You are a consort of necessity, Silas Vane. You will stay in these chambers. You will eat our food, you will undergo the resonance scans, and you will pray to whatever gods your primitive world has left that this child survives. Because if it fails, I will make sure your end is as slow as the hardening of amber." She left then, the door sealing behind her with a final damp thud. I was alone again in the breathing room. I sat back on the floor, placing my hand over my own heart. I could still feel her, a faint, rhythmic thrumming in the back of my mind. A second heartbeat. No, a third. I was Silas Vane, the man who had been kicked out of every prestigious university on Earth for being too reckless, too obsessed with the edges of science. Now I was the father of a miracle I didn't want, on a world that hated my existence. I leaned my head against the amber and closed my eyes. I didn't need a sensor to tell me that the static was rising. Somewhere in the city, people were sharpening knives. Somewhere in the palace, a queen was weeping mercury. And inside the Sovereign, a bridge was being built, cell by cell, between two worlds that had no business touching. Memory is a fickle thing on Aethelgard. The planet itself stores history in its amber veins. And since the synthesis, my own mind had started to bleed into the world's archives. As I lay in my cell, the present faded, and the past came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. I remembered the day I arrived at the Skydock. It was 21 days ago. The air had been thin and crisp, tasting of ozone and those strange, singing lilies that grew along the docking pylons. I had been sent by the Solterra conglomerate, officially as a diplomatic attaché, unofficially as a corporate scout. They wanted the neuroamber. They wanted the secret to the Aethelgary's infinite energy. Keep your head down, Silas. My handler, a man named Miller who smelled of cheap synth tobacco and desperation, had told me, don't touch the locals. Don't look the queen in the eye. And for the love of the void, don't try to be a hero. I had failed on all counts. The ceremony of the Cordial of Echoes was supposed to be the pinnacle of my mission. It took place in the Grand Atrium, a space so vast it had its own weather patterns. Clouds of golden pollen drifted among the pillars of living quartz. The Aethelgari were there in their thousands, a sea of shimmering silver skin and glowing robes. They looked like gods made of starlight. We humans, in our stiff charcoal suits and polished shoes, looked like beetles scurrying across a ballroom floor. Sovereign Kaelith had been at the center of it all. She sat upon the throne of roots, her ears decorated with jewelry made of singing glass. When she looked at me, I felt a strange tug in my gut. It wasn't just attraction, it was a recognition. Like a frequency I had been searching for my whole life was finally being played. The cordial was a ritual. We were to share a drink of distilled resonance, a liquid that looked like molten sapphires. It was meant to synchronize our brainwaves for a few minutes, enough to sign the treaties with a shared understanding. Dr. Vane, the Sovereign had said, her voice a melody that vibrated through my very teeth. You come from a world of iron and silicon. Our world is of spirit and growth. Do you seek to bridge the gap? I took the goblet, my hand brushing hers, the first spark, a tiny, insignificant jolt of electricity. I seek to understand, Sovereign, I replied. I raised the goblet. The liquid was sweet, like fermented honey in ancient secrets. Beside me, Kaelith drank as well. For a moment, the world blurred. I could see the city through her eyes, a web of light and song. She could see Earth through mine, a place of gray concrete and longing. Then the world screamed. The explosion didn't come from a bomb of metal and fire. It was a resonant spike, the Purity Front, radical traditionalists who viewed the treaty as a death sentence for their culture, had hidden a dampening field generator beneath the floor. When it activated, it didn't just explode. It shattered the harmony of the room. The living quartz pillars cracked, sending prismatic shards flying like shrapnel. The Aethelgari screamed, their skin turning a sickly, opaque gray as the pulse was ripped away from them. I saw the generator, a jagged piece of black tech that looked like a tumor in the beautiful room, pulsing with a violent, oily light. It was heading for a meltdown, a surge of bioenergy that would incinerate everyone in the atrium. Kaelith was paralyzed. As the Sovereign, she was the primary node for the planet's network. The sabotage was hitting her like a neural overload. She began to collapse, her eyes rolling back, her skin flickering like a dying bulb. "Run!" Miller shouted from somewhere behind me. "Silas, get out of there!" I didn't run. I wasn't being a hero. I was being a scientist. I saw the energy arc. I saw the way the resonance was cascading. If I didn't ground that surge, she was dead. The planet was dead. I lunged. I tackled her just as the generator reached critical mass. We hit the floor together, my human body shielding her alien form. The energy didn't hit us. It flowed through us. It was like being struck by a bolt of lightning made of pure information. I felt my DNA unravel and restitch. I felt her consciousness slam into mine, a collision of two galaxies. In that microsecond, the synthesis protocol, a dormant evolutionary backup designed to save the royal line during planetary trauma, recognized a compatible biological anchor. Me. The light blinded me. The sound deafened me. When I woke up an hour later, I was in a medical bay, and the world had changed forever. Now, sitting in the silence of my cell, I looked at my hands. They were still tan, still scarred from years of field work, but they felt different, heavier, more connected. The door hissed open again. It wasn't the queen this time. It was a young Aethelgard male, his skin a pale, nervous lavender. He carried a tray of fruit that smelled like rain. "Eat, human," he said, his voice trembling. "The Sovereign says you must maintain your vitality." I took a piece of fruit. It was shaped like a star and tasted of cold mountain water. "Thanks. What's your name?" The boy hesitated, his ears pinning back. "Lear. I am a tender of the amber." "Lear, tell me something. Are the people really that angry?" He looked at the door, then leaned in close. "The purity front is growing, Silas Vane. They say the Sovereign is tainted. They say the child is a monster. Lord Valerius, the High Priest of the Lattice, is calling for a trial of the deep." "What's that?" Lear's skin turned a shade of fearful gray. "They take you to the core of the planet. They let the planet decide if you are worthy of the bond. Most who go there never come back. Their ghosts are absorbed by the amber." I finished the star fruit, the sweetness turning to ash in my mouth. "Well, Lear, tell your high priest I'm not much for trials, but if the planet wants to talk, I'm all ears." The boy scurried away, leaving me with my thoughts. The bond hummed in my mind, a low-frequency vibration that felt like a purr. I realized then that I wasn't just feeling Kaelith's fear anymore. I was feeling something else, a tiny, rhythmic pulse that was separate from hers, the hybrid, the anomaly, my daughter. I placed my hand on the amber wall and closed my eyes. If I was going to survive this gilded cage, I needed to stop being a prisoner and start being a partner. I needed to learn the language of the pulse. "I have spent my life chasing ghosts in the dirt of dead worlds," I whispered to the empty room. "I suppose it's time I finally stood still for a living one." Suddenly, a sharp pang of hunger that wasn't mine hit my stomach, followed by a craving for something salty and metallic. I laughed, a dry, hollow sound. The queen wanted copper berries, and she wanted them now. The journey had only just begun, and the static was getting louder. The transition from my amber cell to the healing spire was a blur of gold and vertigo. I was escorted by 4 guards whose armor looked less like metal and more like the exoskeletons of prehistoric insects, shimmering with a dull, iridescent violet. They did not touch me, but the air around them hummed with a repressive force that made my skin crawl. They were silent, their faces hidden behind masks of sculpted glass, but I could feel their disdain through the bond. It was like a static charge in the air, a prickling sensation at the base of my neck that told me I was nothing more than a biological contaminant in their holy sanctuary. We moved through corridors that breathed. The walls of the high citadel were composed of a dense, translucent resin that captured the light of the binary suns and channeled it deep into the foundations of the planet. I watched as the amber shifted from a pale honey color to a deep, bruised purple as we ascended. Aethelgard was not a world built by hands. It was a world grown through intent. Every spire, every walkway, and every balcony was a manifestation of the collective will of the Aethelgard, fueled by the pulse, and I, Silas Vane, was a jagged piece of iron thrown into their delicate clockwork. The healing spire was a cathedral of light. It was a vast, circular chamber where the ceiling vanished into a swirling nebula of bioluminescent spores. In the center, a platform of polished obsidian floated above a pool of liquid resonance. Standing there waiting for me was not the Sovereign, but a man who looked ancient even by the standards of a race that lived for centuries. His skin was the color of weathered parchment, and his eyes were 2 points of cold, white light. Arch-Healer Valen, one of the guards announced, his voice echoing in the hollow space. We have brought the human as commanded. The old man did not look up from the holographic ribbons of data that danced between his fingers. He moved with a clinical detachment that reminded me of the high-hat surgeons back on Earth, the ones who viewed patients as sets of variables to be solved rather than people. Set him on the focal point, Valen said. His voice was like the sound of dry leaves skittering across stone. I stepped onto the obsidian platform. The moment my boots touched the surface, the air grew thick with the smell of ozone and crushed mint. A series of rings carved from singing glass began to rotate around me, picking up speed until they were nothing but a shimmering blur. I felt a tug at my very atoms, a pulling sensation that made my vision swim. Don't go belly up on me now, Silas, I muttered to myself. The arch-healer finally looked at me. You speak to yourself, human, a sign of a fractured mind or a desperate ego. Which is it? A bit of both, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. It's a long trip from Earth. You pick up some bad habits when you spend 6 months in a tin can. Valen waved a hand, and the holographic displays shifted. They were no longer showing abstract patterns. They were showing me. My skeletal structure, my nervous system, and the swirling golden thread of the bond that was anchored in my chest. Beside my image was another, a glowing silver-violet silhouette that could only be Kaelith. And between us, pulsing with a light that made my eyes ache, was the anomaly. It was small, no larger than a Terran grape, but it burned with the intensity of a dying star. It was not a fetus in any sense I understood. It was a lattice of geometric light, a complex weave of ethylary resonance and human genetic markers. Look at this, Valen said, his voice losing some of its chill and replacing it with a grudging fascination. This is the synthesis of two incompatible worlds. Your DNA, Silas Vane, is a mess of mutations and evolutionary debris. It is chaotic, flawed, and aggressive. And yet it is precisely those flaws that are allowing the child to survive. I leaned forward, my brow furrowing. What do you mean? An ethylary pregnancy is a process of perfect symmetry, Valen explained, his fingers tracing the light. But the sabotage at the ceremony introduced a level of entropic energy that should have shredded the sovereign's womb. A pure ethylary child would have been consumed by the surge. But your genes, human, they thrive on entropy. They are accustomed to struggle. They have wrapped themselves around the sovereign's resonance like a cage of iron, protecting the core from the storm. So, my brokenness is a shield? I asked. Valen turned to me, his white eyes piercing. In a way, you are a biological anchor, but do not think this makes you a hero. You are a complication. The child is drawing energy from the pulse at a rate we have never seen. It is as if it is not just a life, but a destination, a bridge between what we were and what we might become. The platform beneath me vibrated. I felt a sudden jolt of nausea, followed by a sharp metallic taste in my mouth. Through the bond, I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me, but it wasn't mine. It was Kaelith's. She was somewhere in the palace, perhaps miles away, but I could feel her knees buckling. I could feel the way the child was pulling at her strength, a relentless, hungry ghost. She's failing, I said, reaching out to steady myself against the rotating rings. The arch-healer nodded grimly. The sovereign is strong, but the resonance cost of this hybrid is immense. If we do not balance the flow, she will flatline before the first trimester is complete, and if she goes, the planet goes with her. Aethelgard's stability is tied to its queen. If the node fails, the network collapses into stone. Then let me help, I said. I was a grunt in the labs for 10 years. I know how to balance a load. Valen laughed, a short, dry sound. You are a human with a glass lens in your eye and a heart that beats like a drum. You know nothing of the resonance. But the bond is a different matter. It has made you a part of her. Whether we like it or not, your life is now the secondary battery for the throne. I looked back at the holographic image of the child. It was beautiful in a terrifying alien way. I thought about Earth, about the cold, sterile laboratories of the Solterra conglomerate, where everything was measured in credits and efficiency. They had sent me here to find a resource, but I had found a responsibility. Listen, Doc, I said, looking Valen in the eye. I know I'm just a scrap of meat in your eyes, but that kid in there, that's 50% me. I'm not going to let it, or its mother, burn out because of some cosmic snafu. Tell me what I need to do to take the strain off her. Valen studied me for a long time. The silence in the chamber was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the rotating glass. Outside the viewport, the twin suns were beginning to set, casting long amber shadows across the crystalline city. You must enter the resonance chamber with her, Valen finally said. You must learn to breathe when she breathes. You must offer your flaws to the pulse so that the child can use them as a foundation. It will be painful. It may even be fatal. I took a deep breath, feeling the warm, resin-scented air fill my lungs. I thought of Kaelith's face, the way she had looked at me with such pure, unadulterated hatred, and the way her hand had trembled. She was a god to her people, but in the dark, she was just as scared as I was. When do we start? I asked. We start when the moon rises, Valen replied, waving his hand to dissipate the holograms. And Silas Vane? Try not to die too quickly. It would be a waste of a very interesting experiment. I was led back to my chambers, my mind spinning. The weight of the situation was starting to settle in, a heavy, cold stone in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't just a prisoner anymore. I was a vital component in a planetary survival plan. I walked to the viewport and watched the first moon, a sliver of pale violet, crest the horizon. Is there someone in your life you have been holding on to resentment against? I wondered as I stared at the stars. I had spent years hating the people who had cast me out of the universities, who had called my theories madness. But here, in the heart of an alien empire, my madness was the only thing keeping a queen alive. What would it feel like to finally let that anger go? To accept that the parts of me that were broken were the only parts that mattered? I didn't have an answer yet, but as the bond hummed in my mind, a steady, pulsing rhythm that felt like hope, I knew I was about to find out. Sleep did not come easily on Aethelgard. The planet had a way of whispering to you at night, a low-frequency vibration that rattled your teeth and filled your dreams with images of ancient oceans and singing stones. I had spent 3 hours tossing on the bed of woven silk, my mind replaying the arch-healer's words. I was an anchor. I was a battery. I was a flaw. I stood up and paced the floor, my bare feet enjoying the warmth of the amber. The palace was quiet, or as quiet as a living organism ever gets. I could hear the slow, rhythmic thrum of the water pipes, the soft rustle of the neural vines in the gardens outside, and the distant, haunting call of a sky ray. The bond was a low ember in my chest, a warm glow that told me Kaelith was asleep. Her dreams were jagged, filled with images of falling glass and gray shadows. I tried to send a pulse of calm through the link, a trick I had been practicing. It was like throwing a pebble into a stormy lake, but for a moment, the turbulence in her mind seemed to settle. A soft chime echoed in the room. I turned, my hand instinctively reaching for a heavy glass carafe on the table. In this place, a midnight visitor was rarely a friend. The door dilated, and Lear, the young tender I had met earlier, stepped inside. His skin was almost white with terror, and his ears were pressed flat against his skull. "Silas Vane," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You must move. Now." "What's going on, Lear?" I asked, setting the carafe down but keeping my body tense. "The Purity Front," he said, glancing behind him. "They have bypassed the outer wards. They are in the ventilation veins. They aren't here for the Sovereign. They are here for you." My heart skipped a beat. Why me? If they want to stop the child, she's the target. "No," Lear said, grabbing my arm with surprisingly strong fingers. "They cannot kill the Sovereign. It would trigger a planetary collapse. But if they kill the human catalyst, the bond will shatter. The child will die, and the Sovereign will be free of the taint. To them, you are the poison that must be purged." I didn't wait for a second explanation. I grabbed my boots and shoved my feet into them. "Lear, where are the guards?" Compromised, he said, leading me toward a small secondary opening in the wall that I hadn't noticed before. Lord Valerius has many followers in the military. They are looking the other way. You must get to the Sovereign's private sanctum. It is the only place with independent wards. We stepped into a narrow service tunnel, the walls here rough and unpolished. It smelled of damp earth and something sharp like vinegar. We moved quickly, Lear leading the way with a bioluminescent stone that cast a flickering green light. Check your six, Lear, I whispered, falling back on old habits from my days as a field researcher in the dangerous sectors of the belt. We had moved maybe 50 meters when the first attack came. It wasn't a gunshot or a blade. It was a wave of sonic pressure that slammed into us from behind, knocking me off my feet and sending Lear sprawling. My vision went white, and for a second I couldn't breathe. I rolled onto my stomach, my hands searching the floor for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a jagged piece of loose amber. Two figures emerged from the shadows. They were dressed in the simple white robes of the priesthood, but their faces were covered by tactical rebreathers, and they carried long, humming staves that crackled with blue energy. The abomination's father, one of them said, his voice distorted by the mask. Your presence is an insult to the pulse. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like lead. Listen, fellas, I said, trying to buy time. I'm just a guy who took a wrong turn at the nebula. We don't have to do this. The first priest lunged, his staff swinging in a wide arc. I ducked, the air above my head sizzling with ozone. I slammed my shoulder into his chest, using the weight I had built up from years of hauling gear on high-gravity moons. He grunted, stumbling back, and I followed up with a hard jab to his throat. He went down, his staff clattering on the floor. But the second one was faster. He leveled his staff at me and a bolt of blue lightning leapt from the tip. I dived behind a protruding root of the palace, the energy scorching the amber just inches from my arm. Lear, I shouted, run! The boy didn't run. He picked up the bioluminescent stone and threw it with all his might at the priest's head. It struck him square in the mask, cracking the glass and momentarily blinding him. I didn't waste the opening. I lunged forward, grabbing the fallen staff from the first priest. It felt hot in my hand, vibrating with a frequency that made my skin itch. I didn't know how to use it, but I knew which end was the business end. I shoved the tip into the second priest's chest and pulled the trigger loop. A massive surge of energy erupted, throwing the priest back 10 meters and sending a jolt of feedback up my arm that nearly dislocated my shoulder. I dropped the staff, my hand smoking. Snafu, I hissed, clutching my arm. Silas! Lear was back on his feet, his skin a frantic shade of yellow. More are coming! We scrambled deeper into the tunnels. The Bond was screaming now, a frantic, jagged alarm that echoed Kaelith's sudden awakening. She knew. She could feel my heart rate spiking, could feel the adrenaline coursing through our shared system. Silas? Her voice was a thunderclap in my head. What is happening? Assassins, I thought back, hoping she could hear me. Purity Front. They're in the walls. Stay where you are, she commanded. I am coming to you. No, I shouted in my mind. Stay in the sanctum. It's a trap to draw you out. I could feel her hesitation, then a surge of fierce, protective rage. I am the Sovereign of Aethelgard. I do not hide while my consort is hunted like an animal. We burst out of the tunnel and into a wide, open plaza filled with night-blooming flowers that glowed like fallen stars. In the center stood Kaelith, flanked by two of her loyalist guards. She held a bow made of solid light, her eyes glowing with a terrifying indigo fire. She saw me, and for a split second, the mask of the queen slipped, revealing the terrified woman beneath. Silas! Before I could reach her, 3 more priests emerged from the surrounding foliage. They didn't go for me. They went for her. One of them threw a device, a small black sphere that began to spin in the air, emitting a high-pitched whine. The pulse in the area began to warp, the glowing flowers turning gray and shriveling in an instant. It was a resonance dampener. Kaelith cried out, her light bow flickering and vanishing. She fell to her knees, clutching her stomach. The dampener was attacking her connection to the planet, and by extension, the child. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just moved. I ran toward the spinning sphere, my boots pounding on the obsidian tiles. The priest tried to intercept me, but I was a man possessed. I took a hit from a sonic stave to my side, a blow that probably cracked two of my ribs, but I didn't stop. I reached the dampener. It was vibrating with such intensity that it felt like it was trying to shake my bones apart. I grabbed it with my bare hands. The pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just physical, it was as if someone were trying to pull my soul out through my fingernails. My human nervous system, crude and unrefined, was being forced to process a level of bioenergy it was never designed for. "Silas, stop!" Kaelith screamed. "It will burn you out." I ignored her. I looked at the priests who were watching in horror. They had expected the device to kill an Aethelgard instantly. They hadn't expected a human to be able to hold on to it. I gripped the sphere and squeezed. I channeled everything I had, all my anger, all my flaws, all the stubborn, human refusal to die, into the device. I offered it the very entropy that Archhealer Valen had talked about. The sphere turned from black to a blinding, chaotic orange. It shrieked one last time and then shattered in my hands, sending a wave of neutral energy outward that knocked everyone in the plaza to the ground. Silence returned to the gardens. The night-blooming flowers began to glow again, their light timid and pale. I lay on the ground, my hands charred and my body feeling like it had been through a trash compactor. I could hear footsteps, fast, urgent. Kaelith knelt beside me, her skin a soft, weeping violet. She gathered my head into her lap, her fingers tracing the burns on my arms. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why would you risk such a thing? You are just a human." "Because," I gasped, the air burning in my lungs. "Because I'm a flaw, remember? And sometimes a flaw is exactly what you need to break a machine." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time, there was no hatred in her eyes. There was only wonder and a deep, aching gratitude. The bond flared, a warm, golden tide that washed away the worst of the pain. "You are a fool, Silas Vane," she said softly. "Yeah," I said, managing a weak smile, "but I'm your fool." As the guards moved in to secure the area and the priests were led away in chains, I realized that the seeds of something new had been planted in the ash of the dampener. I had spent my life thinking my failures made me worthless, but in the eyes of a queen, those same failures had just saved a world. Every time I wanted to give up, something small kept me going, a memory, a promise, a stubborn hope. What is that one thing that keeps you moving forward when everything feels impossible? For me, it was the realization that being broken didn't mean I was useless. It just meant I was built for a different kind of strength. Kaelith helped me to my feet, her hand never leaving mine. The shadow of the purity front was still long, and the trial by the core was still coming. But as we walked back toward the sanctum, the third heartbeat, the tiny, luminous pulse of the child, was stronger than ever. We were a mess of silver and bronze, light and shadow, but we were alive. And on Aethelgard, that was the greatest miracle of all. The elevator was not a machine of gears and grease. It was a descending throat of amber. It swallowed us whole and began a slow, rhythmic contraction that pulled us deeper into the subterranean heart of Aethelgard. Kaelith stood beside me, her hand gripping a translucent rail that pulsed with a soft, bioluminescent green. Her skin was a shade of pale lavender I had never seen before, a sign of deep exhaustion. The assassination attempt in the gardens had been thwarted, but the cost was etched into every line of her regal face. "How are you holding up?" I asked. My voice sounded small in the damp, organic silence of the shaft. My ribs were screaming at me, each one feeling like a jagged shard of glass grinding against my lungs. I had wrapped my torso in a makeshift bandage of neural silk, but it was like putting a Band-Aid on a crater. Kaelith did not look at me. Her gaze was fixed on the shifting walls of the vein. "I am functional, Silas, but the child is restless. It feels as though a sun is trying to ignite inside my belly." I leaned back against the warm wall, feeling the vibrations of the planet's core humming through my spine. "It's the resonance, isn't it?" The dampener from the gardens did more than just scramble the pulse. It triggered a hunger. She finally turned to me, her indigo eyes searching mine. "It is more than hunger. It is a demand. We are heading to the mother lattice, the central hub of the Aethelgard consciousness. If I am to carry this hybrid to term, I must stabilize the bond at the source. But be warned, Silas, the lattice is not a place for the uninitiated. It will peel back your skin and look at your soul. I managed a dry, painful laugh. My soul has been through worse than a planetary network, Kaelith. I've survived Earth's corporate boards and 2 years in a Martian mining colony. If your planet wants to take a peek under the hood, it's welcome to it. Just tell it not to mind the dents. She didn't smile, but the tension in her ears softened slightly. You are a strange creature, Silas Vane. You speak of your flaws as if they are medals of honor. On my world, the only people without flaws are the ones lying in the morgue, I said. We're built from mistakes. Evolution is just one big series of happy accidents that didn't kill us. The elevator shuddered and came to a halt. The walls dilated, opening into a cavern so vast that the ceiling was lost in a fog of glowing spores. This was the marrow. This was the place where the living amber began its life as a liquid flow of pure information. Great rivers of golden sap cascaded down from the ceiling, pooling into lakes of molten light. In the center of it all stood a structure that defied every law of physics, a massive, rotating sphere of emerald-colored vines and crystalline nerves. The mother lattice, Kaelith whispered. We stepped out onto a bridge of translucent moss. The air here was thick, smelling of wet earth, ozone, and something ancient. The scent of time itself. As we approached the sphere, the bond in my chest began to thrum with a frequency so high it was almost a sound. It was the third heartbeat, the child's pulse, and it was reaching out to the planet like a long-lost friend. Sitrep, Kaelith, I muttered, the military slang slipping out as my adrenaline began to spike. What's the play here? She led me to the edge of the liquid lake. We must enter the flow. Together. The lattice needs to recognize the human signature as a permanent anchor. If it accepts you, the strain on my body will be halved. If it rejects you, I know. I'm toast, I finished. I looked at the golden liquid. It was beautiful and terrifying. Let's not keep the lady waiting. We waded into the lake. The liquid was warm, like blood, and it clung to my skin with a sticky, magnetic pull. As the amber rose to my waist, the world around me began to dissolve. The cavern vanished. Kaelith's physical form vanished. I was no longer a man with broken ribs and a cynical attitude. I was a collection of electrical impulses floating in a sea of stars. Then the lattice spoke. It wasn't a voice. It was a flood of data. I saw the history of Aethelgard, the thousands of years of perfect, stagnant peace. I saw the Aethelaries rise, their mastery of biology, and their slow, creeping decline. The planet was dying, I realized. It was too perfect. It had no room for change, no room for the messy, entropic chaos that drove life forward. It was a clock that had been wound too tight. Then it turned its gaze on me. I felt it sift through my memories. It saw the day I was expelled from the university for trying to merge synthetic DNA with organic neural tissue. It saw my failure, my shame, and the years I spent drifting through the galaxy, a man who felt like a ghost in his own life. It saw my arrogance, my anger, and my deep, hidden fear that I was fundamentally broken. Unstable, the lattice projected. Chaotic, a flaw in the pattern. I felt a surge of rejection. The amber around me began to thicken, turning cold and heavy. I was being squeezed, my atoms compressed by the weight of a planetary disapproval. Silas, Kaelith's voice echoed in the void. Don't fight it. Give it your truth. I grit my teeth, or whatever passed for teeth in this digital soup. You want my truth? I shouted into the darkness. Fine. I'm a mess. I'm a failure. I'm a loudmouthed, sarcastic, middle-aged human who hasn't had a decent night's sleep in 10 years. But I'm also the only thing standing between this queen and a grave. I pushed back against the lattice. I didn't try to be perfect. I didn't try to hide the scars or the mistakes. I offered them up like a sacrifice. I showed the planet that it was my very instability that allowed me to survive the explosion. I showed it that life isn't a straight line. It's a jagged, messy circle. The pressure suddenly vanished. The cold amber turned back into a warm, golden embrace. Necessary, the lattice whispered. The catalyst of entropy. The bridge. I felt a sudden, violent connection. A bolt of golden energy shot from the lattice, passing through me and into Kaelith. I felt her gasp, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. The third heartbeat, our child, flared with a blinding, violet light. It wasn't just taking energy anymore. It was cycling it. It was becoming a lung for the planet, breathing in the chaos and exhaling stability. We were pulled back into reality. I collapsed onto the mossy bank, gasping for air. My ribs still hurt, but the crushing weight of the bond was gone. It felt lighter now, more like a conversation than a command. Kaelith was kneeling beside me, her skin glowing with a vibrant, healthy indigo. She looked at me with an expression that was halfway between awe and terror. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it. The lattice has accepted the hybrid as the new core. It has rewritten the planetary code." I wiped a glob of amber from my eye and sat up slowly. "Great. Does that mean I get a union card? Or maybe some hazard pay?" She didn't laugh, but she reached out and touched my hand. Her fingers were warm and steady. "You are no longer a human guest on this world, Silas Vane. You are a part of its architecture." I looked up at the rotating sphere of the mother lattice. It seemed different now, less like a machine and more like a heart. But the victory felt hollow as I remembered the shadows in the palace. "We're not out of the woods yet, are we?" I asked. "No," Kaelith said, her face hardening as she looked toward the elevator. "The great conclave meets at 10 in the morning. Lord Valerius has called for the obsidian mirror. He will demand our abdication." "Then I guess it's time to put on my best suit," I said, despite the fact that my suit was currently a tattered mess of silk and blood. "Let's go show those high and mighty lords what a flaw can really do." The Grand Conclave Chamber was a masterpiece of intimidation. It was a massive amphitheater-style hall carved from a single block of black, volcanic glass. The walls were so polished they acted as a mirror, reflecting the thousands of Aethelgard nobles who sat in tiered rows, their skins shifting through shades of judgmental gray and hostile violet. At the very bottom of the bowl stood a single platform, the obsidian mirror. I walked down the central aisle, my boots clicking rhythmically against the glass. I had been given a new tunic of charcoal-colored neural silk, though my side was still heavily bandaged. Kaelith walked beside me, her head held high, the sovereign's crown of singing glass humming on her brow. She looked every bit the queen, but through the bond, I could feel the tremor in her heart. She was terrified, not for herself, but for us. "Stow the jitters, Kaelith," I whispered. "We've got the high ground here, even if it feels like we're in a pit." She didn't break her stride. "You do not understand, Silas. The obsidian mirror is more than a stage. It is a resonance amplifier. If the conclave votes against us, the mirror will broadcast their collective will. It can strip a sovereign of her power in 3 seconds. It can turn our blood to ice." "Sounds like a real peach of a system," I muttered. We reached the center platform. Standing opposite us was Lord Valerius. He was a tall, gaunt man with skin the color of a winter sky. His robes were encrusted with ancient, unlit resonance crystals, and his eyes were 2 chips of frozen obsidian. "Sovereign Kaelith," he began, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics until it sounded like the rumble of an earthquake. "You stand before the collective will of Aethelgard. You are accused of biological treason. You have allowed an outworlder to taint the royal line. You have carried a monster in your womb." Kaelith stepped forward, her voice calm and clear. "This child is not a monster, Valerius. It is a bridge. It has already been accepted by the mother lattice." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. I could see the confusion and the fear. The mother lattice was sacred. If it had accepted the child, their entire theological foundation was at risk. "The lattice is old," Valerius shouted, his skin turning a deep, angry crimson. "It is senile. It has been fooled by the human's chaotic signature. We are the Aethelgard. We are the keepers of the pure pulse. We do not accept a hybrid king." He turned his gaze on me, his eyes narrowing with pure, unadulterated venom. "And you, human, you are the architect of this corruption. You are a stray dog who wandered into a temple and made a mess on the floor. Give us one reason why we should not excise you from this world right now." I stepped forward, ignoring the warning squeeze from Kaelith's hand. I looked up at the thousands of faces, all of them waiting for me to beg, to apologize, or to fail. Look, I said, my voice echoing in the silence. I know what you see when you look at me. You see a short-lived, clumsy creature from a world of dirt and smoke. You see a man who's been kicked around by life until he's more scar tissue than skin. You see a flaw. I paused, letting the word hang in the air. And you're right, I continued. I am a flaw. I'm a big, fat human error. But here's the thing you high and mighty lords don't seem to get. Your world is dying. The murmurs turned into shouts of outrage, but I pushed through. Don't believe me? Ask your healers. Ask your scholars. Your pulse has been weakening for 500 years. Why? Because you've squeezed out all the entropy. You've made everything so perfect, so static, that you've stopped growing. You're a garden that's been weeded so much there's nothing left but dead dirt. I pointed a finger at Valerius. You want to kill me because I'm different. You want to kill this child because she's not pure. But she's exactly what Aethelgard needs. She's the infusion of chaos that's going to jumpstart your heart. She's not a taint, she's a reboot. Valerius laughed, a cold, mocking sound. You speak of science you do not understand, human. The obsidian mirror will show the truth. Let the resonance decide. He raised his hands and the black floor began to glow. A low, thrumming sound filled the chamber, building in intensity until my teeth felt like they were going to vibrate out of my skull. The mirror was activating. It was pulling the collective will of the thousands of nobles in the room and focusing it into a single psychic beam. I felt the weight of their hatred. It was a cold, suffocating pressure that forced me to my knees. It felt like 10,000 voices all screaming no at the same time. Silas! Kaelith cried out, falling beside me. She tried to shield me with her own resonance, but the mirror was too strong. It was bypassing her, targeting the human element. I felt my heart falter. My lungs refused to expand. The mirror was telling my body that it didn't belong here, that it should just stop existing. I saw my life flashing before my eyes, the long nights in the lab, the cold coffee, the loneliness. It would be so easy to just let go, to let the black glass take me. But then I felt it, the third heartbeat. It wasn't a scream, it was a laugh, a tiny, luminous giggle of pure, defiant life. The child wasn't fighting the mirror, she was eating it. She was taking all that focused hatred, all that cold, stagnant energy, and she was turning it into something else. I felt a sudden, massive surge of power. It wasn't my power, and it wasn't Kaelith's. It was the child's. She was acting as a lens, refracting the mirror's energy and sending it back out into the room. The black glass beneath us suddenly turned white. A wave of warm, golden light erupted from the platform, washing over the tears of nobles. It wasn't a weapon, it was a revelation. For a split second, every person in that room felt what I felt. They felt the messy, beautiful, chaotic potential of a new life. They felt the hope that comes from change. The humming stopped. The light faded. The chamber was silent. Thousands of Aethelari sat stunned, their skin glowing with a soft, confused pink. Valerius was shaking, his face a mask of disbelief. That is impossible. You have bewitched the mirror. No, Valerius, Kaelith said, standing up with a grace that was now backed by a terrifying new power. The mirror has shown us the truth. It has shown us that our future does not lie in purity, but in synthesis. She looked at the nobles. My people, she said, her voice echoing with the resonance of the mother lattice. For too long we have lived in fear of the dark, fear of the different. We have built walls of amber to keep out the universe. But the universe is already here. It is in this man. It is in this child. And it is in the very breath of our planet. A single woman in the third row, a military commander with a scarred face, stood up. She looked at me, then at Kaelith. She hammered her fist against her chest in a traditional salute. The bridge remains, she shouted. Slowly, one by one, the nobles began to stand. The gray and violet of their skin shifted to a warm, accepting orange. It wasn't a total victory. I could see the pockets of resistance, the men like Valerius who would never change. But the tide had turned. Kaelith turned to me, her eyes wet with tears. You did it, Silas. You made them see. I stood up, my body feeling like it had been through a centrifuge. I'm pretty sure I'm going to throw up, I said, leaning on her for support. But at least we won the room. We walked out of the conclave, leaving the shattered remains of the old order behind us. As we reached the balcony overlooking the city, I looked out at the twin suns. They were high in the sky, 4 hours past noon. For so long I tried to be someone else, I thought as I watched the light dance across the spires. Someone better, someone worthy. But in the end, it was my flaws that saved us all. It was the parts of me that were broken that allowed the new life to take root. I looked at Kaelith, her silver skin shimmering in the sunlight. She looked back at me, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like a man who had finally found his frequency. What parts of yourself have you been hiding, thinking they make you less, I wondered. Because on Aethelgard, I had learned that those are the only parts that truly matter. Those are the parts that build the bridges. But as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of singing lilies and ozone, I felt a chill. The conclave was won, but the purity front was still out there. And the child was growing faster than any Ithilari doctor had ever seen. The bridge was built. But would it be strong enough to carry the weight of two worlds? The transition from the warmth of the Grand Conclave to the absolute bone-chilling cold of the obsidian wastes was a violent jerk of reality. One moment, I had been leaning on Kaelith, basking in the golden glow of a temporary political victory. The next, a shadow had unfolded from the very glass beneath our feet, a specialized void-cloak technology used by the most fanatical cells of the Purity Front. They didn't use staves or light bows. They used a localized gravity well, a tactical collapse of space that sucked me in before Kaelith could even scream my name. I hit the ground hard, the impact sending a fresh, white-hot explosion of agony through my cracked ribs. I rolled, gasping for air that wasn't there. My lungs seized, searching for the rich, resin-scented atmosphere of the citadel, but finding only the dry, metallic tang of dust and vacuum. I scrambled for my emergency breather, my fingers fumbling with the seal on my collar. I snapped it shut just as my vision began to go black at the edges. The hiss of recycled oxygen was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I lay there for a long minute, staring up at a sky that was no longer violet. Here on the far side of Aethelgard, the atmosphere was thin, a bruised indigo that bled into the eternal black of the void. This was the petrified zone, the place where the planet's neural network had long since died, leaving behind nothing but forests of calcified amber and plains of jagged obsidian. "Get up, Silas," I wheezed, the sound echoing hollowly inside my helmet. This is not the place for a nap. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. The landscape was a nightmare of frozen motion. Giant, tree-like structures of gray, stone-like resin towered hundreds of meters into the air, their branches twisted into agonized shapes as if they had been caught in a scream before they turned to stone. There was no pulse here, no warmth, no song. It was a graveyard of a world that had forgotten how to breathe. The bond in my chest was a thin, frayed thread. I could feel Kaelith, but she was a million miles away, a faint, frantic signal lost in a sea of static. The child was even quieter, a tiny ember shielded by a wall of ice. "Silas!" The thought was a ghost, a whisper in the back of my skull. "Silas, where are you?" "I'm on the dark side of the moon, sweetheart," I thought back, knowing the message probably wouldn't make it. "I've gone completely off the grid." I checked my wrist comp. The internal chronometer was spinning wildly. The gravity well had scrambled the sensors. I estimated I had maybe 6 hours of oxygen left if I didn't do anything stupid like running. My water supply was even worse. I had half a liter of recycled condensate. This was a classic FUBAR situation. The Purity Front hadn't just kidnapped me, they had dumped me in the one place on the planet where even the Sovereign's reach was limited. I looked around for my captors. They were gone. They didn't need to stay. In their eyes, the void would do the work for them. A human without the pulse, without tech, and with a broken body wouldn't last a single planetary rotation. I started walking. I didn't have a map, but I had a direction. Back toward the light, back toward the warmth. My boots crunched on the obsidian sand, each step a testament to the stubborn, human refusal to just lay down and die. 3 kilometers in, the hallucinations started. "It's the lack of resonance," a voice said. It was Miller, my old handler from the Solterra conglomerate. He was sitting on a jagged stump of gray amber, smoking a phantom cigar. "You're out of your league, Silas. You're a scrap of meat in a world of ghosts. Why don't you just unseal the suit? It'd be quicker." "Shut up, Miller," I muttered, walking right through him. He dissolved into a cloud of gray dust. I knew what was happening. My brain, starved of the psychic connection it had grown accustomed to over the last few weeks, was trying to fill the silence with whatever it could find. It was reaching into my memories, pulling out the ghosts of my failures. I saw the dean of the university, his face twisted in disappointment. "You were a flaw in our system, Silas. We gave you everything, and you gave us chaos." I saw the faces of the researchers I had worked with on Mars, their eyes cold and judgmental. "You always think you're the smartest guy in the room, Silas, but look at you now, dying alone in a desert of glass." I stumbled, my knee catching on a sharp edge of stone. I fell, the impact jarring my ribs again. I screamed, a raw animal sound that was swallowed by the vacuum. I lay there, my forehead pressed against the cold glass of my visor. Maybe they're right, I thought. Maybe I am just a flaw, a piece of grit that got caught in the gears. The silence of the void began to press in on me. It was heavy, a physical weight that wanted to crush my spirit. It told me that my struggle was meaningless, that the universe didn't care about a bridge made of silver and bronze. It told me that perfection was the only thing that lasted, and I was far from perfect. But then a spark. It didn't come from my mind. It came from the bond. A tiny rhythmic vibration, no stronger than the beat of a moth's wing. Thump, thump. The child. She was reaching out through the void. She wasn't using the pulse. She wasn't using the planet's network. She was using me. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. The Aethelgard couldn't survive here because they were too attuned to the perfection of the network. When the network died, they died with it. But I was human. I had spent my whole life in the silence. I was built for the dark. I was a survivor of 1,000 small deaths, 1,000 failures that had tempered me into something that couldn't be easily broken. I pushed myself up again. I wasn't just a flaw. I was an adaptation. I reached out with my own mind, not looking for the planet, but for the child. I offered her my stubbornness. I offered her the gritty, unrefined energy of my survival instinct. I showed her how to hold on to life when the world wanted to let go. The ember in my chest flared. It wasn't a sun, but it was a candle, a small, defiant light in the middle of the obsidian dark. Kaelith, I thought, focusing every ounce of my will. Kaelith, I'm still here. I'm walking. Don't let them take the throne. Don't let them win. The bond hummed, a low-frequency vibration that started to warm my blood. I could feel her now. She was fighting. She was standing in the high sanctum, facing down the lords who wanted to tear us apart. She was using the strength I had given her in the marrow, the strength of the broken bridge. I looked at the horizon. A faint, violet glow was beginning to creep over the edge of the obsidian mountains. Dawn, or as close to dawn as this side of the planet ever got. I had covered 12 kilometers in 4 hours. My oxygen was down to 15%. My water was gone. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and my ribs were a constant, throbbing reminder of my mortality. But I wasn't dead. I reached the crest of a ridge and looked down into a valley filled with silver mist. In the center of the valley stood a ruin, an ancient resonance tower from the era before the Great Stagnation. It was cracked and crumbling, but I could see a faint, rhythmic pulse of light coming from its peak. "Emergency beacon," I whispered. "If I can get to that tower, I can boost the bond. I can show her exactly where I am." I started down the slope, sliding on the loose glass. I fell a dozen times, my suit getting scuffed and torn. I didn't care. I was a human on a mission, and if there's one thing we're good at, it's being too stubborn to know when we're beaten. I reached the base of the tower. It was a massive, twisting pillar of gray amber, its surface covered in ancient runes that I couldn't read. I found a maintenance hatch, its seal long since rotted away. I pried it open with a piece of obsidian, the effort nearly making me pass out from the pain in my side. I crawled inside. The interior was a web of fossilized neural fibers. I climbed the central shaft, my fingers bleeding through my gloves as I gripped the rough stone. 1 meter, 2 meters, 10 meters. I reached the top. The beacon was a simple crystal, cracked and dim. It was waiting for a signal it hadn't received in 1,000 years. I knelt before it. I didn't have a power cell. I didn't have a resonance crown. I had myself. I placed my hands on the crystal. I closed my eyes and let the bond open completely. I didn't hold anything back. I gave the crystal my memories, my pain, my love for a queen who hated me, and my hope for a child I had never seen. I gave it the chaos of Earth and the grit of the Martian mines. The crystal began to glow. First a dull orange, then a brilliant, defiant gold. The tower groaned as ancient circuits flickered to life. A beam of pure, unrefined energy shot into the sky, piercing the indigo clouds and punching a hole right through to the stars. It was a flare, a signal, a bridge. I felt a sudden, massive surge of connection. The static vanished. The distance vanished. Silas. Kaelith's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a roar of triumph. I see you. I am coming. I slumped against the base of the beacon, my oxygen alarm chirping a final frantic warning. My vision was fading, but I was smiling. I had survived the void, not by being perfect, but by being exactly what I was. A flaw that refused to be erased. As the darkness finally took me, the last thing I felt was the warmth of the third heartbeat, stronger than the suns of Aethelgard. While I was crawling through the obsidian dust of the void, Sovereign Kaelith was standing in a different kind of darkness. The high sanctum was a chamber of cold, white light, where the air was thick with the scent of burning incense and the heavy, oppressive weight of tradition. Kaelith stood at the center of the room, her robes of state draped around her like a shroud. Opposite her stood the High Council, 12 elders whose skin was the color of ancient bone, their eyes hidden behind veils of woven silver. At the head of the council sat Lord Valerius. He looked triumphant. The kidnapping of Silas had been executed perfectly. The human was gone, the bond was severed, and the queen was alone. Sovereign Kaelith, Valerius began, his voice a smooth, oily purr. The human catalyst has been lost. The Mother Lattice reports a total failure of his signature in the network. He is dead, or as good as dead in the wastes. Kaelith's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. Through the bond, she felt a hollow, aching silence where Silas should have been. But deep within that silence, she felt something else. A stubborn, gritty vibration. A refusal. He is not dead, she said, her voice like the striking of two swords. Valerius waved a hand dismissively. Whether he breathes or not is irrelevant. Without his proximity, the hybrid you carry is a drain on our planet's lifeblood. The pulse is flickering, Kaelith. The people are frightened. They see their queen tethered to a ghost. He leaned forward, his silver veil shimmering. The council has reached a decision. You have two paths. You may undergo the rite of severance. We will excise the anomaly from your womb and purge the human taint from your mind. You will remain sovereign, and we will find a pure-blooded consort to stabilize the lineage. Kaelith felt a cold shiver run down her spine. And the second path. Valerius's eyes flashed with a cruel light. Abdication. You will be stripped of your titles, your resonance, and your connection to the lattice. You will be cast out into the fringe colonies, where you may live out your short, miserable days with your hybrid child, if it even survives the separation from the pulse. The room was silent. The 12 elders watched her with the detachment of scientists observing a specimen. They weren't evil, Kaelith realized. They were just afraid. They were so terrified of the unknown, so obsessed with the perfection of the past, that they were willing to kill the future to preserve it. She looked at her hands. They were silver and elegant, the hands of a goddess. But she remembered Silas's hands, rough, scarred, and warm. She remembered the way he looked at the world, not as a pattern to be maintained, but as a puzzle to be solved. She remembered the way he had stepped into the energy surge to save her, not because it was his duty, but because it was right. I have spent my entire life being perfect, Kaelith thought. I have followed every ritual, mastered every resonance, and upheld every law. And where has it led me? To a throne that is a cage, on a planet that is a tomb. She looked up at Valerius. You talk of purity as if it is a shield, but it is a shroud. We are stagnant, Valerius. We are a lake that has stopped flowing, and the water is turning to poison. Silas Vane did not taint me. He woke me up. Valerius stood, his skin turning a deep, stormy gray. You choose the human, then? You choose the flaw over the empire? I choose the bridge, Kaelith said. I choose the life that refuses to be defined by your narrow laws. She reached up and unfastened the sovereign's crown. The singing glass went silent as she placed it on the floor. The connection to the mother lattice didn't vanish, but it shifted. It was no longer a weight she had to carry. It was a conversation she was choosing to have. I am no longer your sovereign by right of blood, she declared, her voice echoing through the sanctum. I am sovereign by right of the bond, and the bond is stronger than your counsel. At that moment, the high sanctum shuddered. A low, thrumming vibration shook the floor, and a brilliant golden light began to bleed through the amber walls. The beacon, one of the elders whispered, pointing toward the eastern horizon. The ancient tower. It has been ignited. Kaelith felt it then, a massive, chaotic surge of energy that punched through the static of the void. It was Silas. He had reached the tower. He had offered his own life force to create a signal she couldn't ignore. The bond flared white-hot. She didn't just feel him, she saw him. She saw the obsidian dust on his suit, the blood on his hands, and the defiant human grin on his face. Silas, she thought, a tear of liquid mercury tracking down her cheek. You magnificent fool. She turned back to the council, her skin glowing with a new vibrant light, a fusion of silver and gold. My consort has called to me, she said, and I am going to answer. Valerius stepped in her way, his hand gripping a resonance stave. You will not leave this chamber. You are under arrest for heresy. Kaelith didn't use a weapon. She didn't need to. She simply opened her mind and let the full weight of the new bond, the combined strength of her resonance and Silas's entropy, wash over him. Valerius gasped, his stave falling from his hands as he was hit by a wave of pure, unfiltered emotion. He saw the beauty of the struggle. He felt the joy of the imperfect. He fell to his knees, his silver veil fluttering to the floor. Kaelith walked past him, her robes snapping in the wind as the doors of the sanctum flew open. Wait. Lear, the young tender, ran into the room. Sovereign, the Loyalist Guard has secured a shuttle. We can reach the wastes in 20 minutes. Go, Kaelith commanded. And Lear, tell the physicians to prepare the resonance chamber. We aren't just bringing back a prisoner, we're bringing back a king. The flight to the obsidian wastes was a blur of speed and light. Kaelith sat in the pilot's seat, her hands moving across the controls with a frantic precision. Every second felt like an eternity. Through the bond, she could feel Silas's life force fading. His oxygen was gone. His heart was slowing. Hold on, Silas, she whispered, pushing the engines to their limit. Just a little longer. They reached the tower just as the golden beam began to flicker. Kaelith didn't wait for the shuttle to land. She leaped from the hatch before it was even a meter above the ground, her boots kicking up clouds of gray dust. She found him slumped against the base of the beacon. He looked like a ghost, his suit covered in grime, his visor cracked. He wasn't breathing. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pried open his helmet. The air of the wastes rushed in, but she didn't care. She pressed her forehead to his, her skin glowing with a desperate, healing light. Silas, she pleaded, come back to me. Don't leave the bridge unfinished. She poured everything she had into the bond. She gave him the air from her own lungs, the warmth from her own blood. She showed him the child, who was pulsing with a fierce violet light, waiting for its father. For a long, terrifying minute, there was nothing but the sound of the wind. Then a gasp. Silas's eyes flew open, his pupils dilating, as he sucked in a ragged breath of the thin, cold air. He looked at her, his vision clearing, and a slow, weak smile spread across his face. Hey, he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. Did I miss the party? Kaelith laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed through the dead valley. You are the most annoying creature in the galaxy, Silas Vane. Yeah, he said, his hand reaching up to touch her cheek. "But I'm your annoying creature." She pulled him into her arms, holding him with a fierce, protective strength. The obsidian mirror had tried to break them. The council had tried to sever them. The void had tried to consume them. But the bridge had held. As they were lifted into the shuttle, the golden beam of the tower finally died out. But it didn't matter. The light was now inside them. Kaelith looked down at the child growing within her. She felt its strength, its chaos, its beautiful, flawed potential. She realized then that she had made the right choice. She had traded a perfect dead throne for a messy, living future. "What parts of yourself have you been hiding, thinking they make you less?" Kaelith wondered, as she watched the stars begin to fade in the light of the rising suns. For her, it had been her vulnerability, her capacity to love something that wasn't pure. But she saw now that those were the only parts that truly mattered. They were a mess of silver and bronze, royalty and wreckage. But as the shuttle soared back toward the citadel, the third heartbeat was a steady, rhythmic drum, marking the tempo of a new world. The Bridge of Stars was no longer a dream. It was a reality, built on the stubborn grit of a human flaw and the brave choice of an alien queen. And as the twin suns of Aethelgard rose over the horizon, they didn't just light up a planet, they lit up a new beginning. The return to the high citadel was not the silent, shameful crawl the Purity Front had intended. It was a procession of defiance. When the royal shuttle touched down on the iridescent landing pads of the central spire, the air was already vibrating with a new frequency. It wasn't the smooth, humming perfection of the old Aethelgard. It was a jagged, electric thrum that set my teeth on edge and made my heart race. It was the sound of a world waking up from a long, cold sleep. I was carried out on a hover stretcher, my vision still swimming with gray spots from the oxygen deprivation I had suffered in the wastes. My lungs felt like they had been scrubbed with sandpaper, and every breath was a small, sharp victory. Kaelith walked beside me, her hand never leaving my arm. She had discarded her royal robes, wearing only the simple flight suit she had donned to find me. To the thousands of Aethelari gathered in the plaza, she looked less like a distant goddess and more like a warrior who had returned from the front lines of reality. The crowd was silent, but it wasn't the hostile silence of the conclave. It was a stunned, breathless anticipation. They saw their queen, glowing with a vibrancy that was almost blinding, a fusion of her native indigo and the golden entropic light she had drawn from me, and they saw me, the human flaw, battered and broken, yet still breathing. Arch-healer Valen met us at the entrance to the healing spire. He didn't look at Kaelith first. He looked at me. He scanned my vitals with a flick of his fingers, his white eyes widening as the data scrolled through the air. "You should be dead, Silas Vane," he murmured, his voice containing a note of genuine respect. "Your heart stopped for nearly 3 minutes. Your neural pathways were scorched by the beacon's feedback." I gave him a weak, lopsided grin. "I've always had a stubborn streak, Doc. Ask my ex-boss. He used to say I was too dumb to know when to kick the bucket." Valen didn't argue. He turned to Kaelith. "The council is in disarray, Sovereign. Lord Valerius has fled to the lower resonance chambers, but his followers are surrendering. The revelation at the obsidian mirror, it broke them. They cannot deny what they felt. The pulse isn't just stabilizing, it's accelerating." "Get him to the primary chamber," Kaelith commanded. "I don't care about the council. I care about the catalyst." The next 48 hours were a kaleidoscope of pain and light. I was submerged in a tank of high-density resonance fluid, a substance that felt like being wrapped in a warm, liquid hug. It seeped into my pores, knitting my ribs back together and flushing the obsidian dust from my lungs. Through the glass of the tank, I watched Kaelith. She was always there, her silhouette a constant anchor in the swirling gold of my recovery. The bond was no longer a thread. It was a highway. I felt her processing the trauma of the last few days, the terror of the kidnap, the fury of the conclave, and the profound, world-shaking realization that she was no longer alone. She was learning to sit with her own imperfections, to accept that her fear didn't make her a weak queen, but a whole one. On the third day, they pulled me out. I stood on my own 2 feet, my body feeling stronger than it had in years. The scars were still there, the jagged lines on my side, the burns on my hands, but they didn't feel like defects anymore. They felt like a map of where I had been. I found Lear waiting for me in the garden outside the spire. The young boy's skin was a bright, happy shade of teal. "They're calling it the amber resonance, Silas," he said, his ears twitching with excitement. "The city, it's changing. The walls are growing new patterns. The singing lilies are blooming in colors we haven't seen in 2 centuries. And Valerius?" I asked, leaning against a pillar of living quartz. Lear's expression darkened. "He is in the deep cells. He still claims you are a virus. But no one is listening. The people are too busy feeling the new pulse. It's like everyone just woke up from a long nap and realized they were hungry." I looked up at the spires of the citadel. They were no longer the static, frozen lightning I had first seen. They were swaying slightly in the wind, their surfaces rippling with light. The planet was no longer a museum. It was a workshop. Kaelith joined us, her presence a warm weight in my mind. She looked at me, and I saw the transformation in her eyes. The cold, regal detachment was gone, replaced by a fierce, grounded intelligence. "The physicians say the child will be here within 2 weeks," she said, her voice dropping to a private whisper. "Her growth is logarithmic now. She is ready to meet the world she has already changed." "Are you ready?" I asked, taking her hand. She squeezed my fingers, her silver skin shimmering. "I am terrified, Silas. And for the first time in my life, I am not ashamed of that." We walked through the gardens, past the Aethelgard, who bowed not out of fear, but out of a new kind of recognition. We were the bridge. We were the flaw that had saved the pattern. And as the twin suns set, casting long violet shadows across the world, I realized that the hardest part of the journey wasn't the void or the mirror. It was the quiet, daily act of choosing to stay, choosing to be seen, and choosing to believe that we were enough, exactly as we were. The harvest of the last few weeks had been bitter, but the light that followed was worth every scar. We were no longer 2 separate species playing at diplomacy. We were a new kind of family, standing at the edge of a new kind of history. 9 days later, the world of Aethelgard held its breath. The birth was not a quiet affair, it was a planetary event. As Kaelith's contractions began, the very foundations of the high citadel began to hum. Every resonance crystal in the city glowed with a soft, pulsing violet, synchronized with the tempo of her labor. The pulse, which had once been a steady, predictable drone, became a symphony of chaotic, beautiful crescendos. I was in the birthing chamber, a space carved from the oldest, most sacred amber on the planet. I wasn't standing in the corner like a nervous spectator. I was part of the process. My hands were locked with Kaelith's, my human nervous system acting as a ground for the massive surges of energy that were radiating from her body. "Push, Kaelith," I shouted over the roar of the singing walls. "You've got this." She was a force of nature. Her skin was a brilliant, incandescent white, her eyes burning with the fire of the mother lattice. She wasn't just bringing a child into the world, she was anchoring a new evolution. I felt the moment of transition. It wasn't a physical sensation, but a psychic one. It was the feeling of a door being thrown open. A burst of pure, golden light erupted from the center of the room, so bright that the arch-healers had to shield their eyes. And then, silence. The hum of the walls settled into a gentle, rhythmic purr. The blinding light faded to a soft, warm glow. In the center of the chamber, cradled in a nest of glowing neural silk, lay a tiny, miraculous being. She was beautiful. Her skin was the color of a sunset on Earth, a warm, metallic bronze that shimmered with an underlying silver luminescence. Her eyes, when they finally opened, were a deep, starlit indigo. She had the elegant, elongated ears of her mother, but the sturdy, defiant set of my jaw. She reached out a tiny, 4-fingered hand and grabbed my thumb. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Aethelgard's daughter," Valen whispered, his voice trembling with awe. Kaelith reached out, her face wet with tears, and gathered the child to her chest. She looked at me, and the bond between us was so bright it felt like a physical warmth. "Her name is Alara," Kaelith said softly. "The name we chose in the marrow. It means, the one who speaks to the stars." I sat on the edge of the birthing cradle, my heart feeling like it was 3 sizes too big for my chest. I looked at my daughter, and then at the woman I had come to love against every law of biology and logic. We were a mess. We were a biological impossibility. We were the definition of a mistake, and we were perfect. A few months later, I stood on the balcony of our private quarters, watching the twin suns rise over the city of Nexara, the new name for the capital, meaning the beginning. The city was unrecognizable from the one I had first arrived at. The rigid, crystalline structures were being replaced by more fluid, organic designs. There were more humans here now, scientists, artists, and diplomats who didn't come to extract resources, but to learn. I watched Alara, who was already crawling across the floor with a speed that shouldn't be possible for a 4-month-old. She was chasing a small, floating light wisp, her bronze skin glowing with every laugh. She didn't need a resonance crown to talk to the planet. The planet was already her friend. I felt a familiar presence behind me. Kaelith leaned against the doorframe, her hair loose, a small smile playing on her lips. She was no longer the sovereign of the old world. She was the co-guardian of the new resonance. "Thinking about the past again, Silas?" she asked, her voice a warm melody in my mind. "Always," I said, turning to her. "It's a habit." She walked over and joined me at the rail, her shoulder brushing mine. The bond was a steady, comforting hum, a background music to our lives. The transition hadn't been easy. There were still factions that resisted the change, still tensions between the humans and the Aethelgard, but the planet was alive again. The living amber was growing at a rate of 3 meters per year, reclaiming the dead zones of the wastes. "We did a good thing, Kaelith," I said, looking out at the sprawling, vibrant city. "We did a necessary thing," she corrected, leaning her head on my shoulder. "We broke the world so that it could learn how to heal itself." I looked at my hands, the scars now faded into the bronze of my skin. I remembered the man who had stepped off that shuttle months ago, a bitter, cynical biologist who thought he was a mistake. I remembered the fear, the anger, and the crushing weight of trying to be someone I wasn't. I spent most of my life running from my own shadow. I thought that every mistake I made, every bridge I burned, and every failure I recorded was a mark against my soul. I believed that the universe only had room for the perfect, the polished, and the pure. I saw myself as a glitch in the system, a piece of code that should have been deleted. But standing here, on a world that shouldn't exist, holding a child who shouldn't be possible, I realized how wrong I was. It wasn't my successes that saved Aethelgard. It wasn't my brilliance or my expertise. It was my scars. It was my ability to walk through the dark because I had lived there for so long. It was the fact that I was broken in exactly the right way to fit into the cracks of this world. We spend so much time trying to fix ourselves, trying to buff out the dents and hide the fractures, that we forget those are the very places where the light gets in. Our flaws aren't obstacles to our purpose. They are the tools we use to achieve it. I'm still a mess. I'm still a loudmouth, sarcastic human who makes too many jokes. But for the first time in my life, I'm not trying to be anything else. I'm Silas Vane. I'm a father, I'm a partner, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I reached out and picked up Alara as she crawled toward my boots. She looked up at me and let out a bright golden giggle, a sound that resonated through the very walls of the balcony. The twin suns climbed higher, their light turning the city into a sea of molten gold and shimmering violet. The Bridge of Stars was no longer just a metaphor. It was a living, breathing reality, stretching from the dirt of Earth to the amber of Aethelgard. We were the anomaly. We were the chaos. We were the flaw. And as I looked at my daughter's eyes, filled with the light of two worlds, I knew that the bridge would hold. It would hold because it wasn't built on the shifting sands of perfection, but on the solid, unyielding rock of who we truly were. I've spent my life looking for a world that made sense, only to find that the world that makes the most sense is the one we build together from the pieces of our broken dreams. I wonder, as I look out at this brand new sky, what parts of yourself have you been hiding, thinking they make you less? Have you ever stopped to think that those very flaws might be the only things capable of building the bridge you've been searching for? I smiled and pressed a kiss to Alara's forehead. The morning air was warm, and for the first time in 40 years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was just there. Silas Vane took a deep breath, adjusted the small bronze hand gripping his tunic, and walked back inside to start the day.